There's a lot of great stuff right now playing on the radio, or maybe on a streaming platform, or movies I don't know. I don't know what's around the corner, but one thing I can say, yeah, but who did it first? Hello, and welcome to Yeah, but Who Did It First? A program where we examine current popular music trends and discover their origins. The Halloween edition. Every now and again, the human psyche needs a good scare. Halloween is the best time to revel in this madness with stories of ghosts and goblins and wizards and, well, all sorts of other things. With so much technology and so many screens around us nowadays, the easiest way for many of us to experience a good fright is with movies. So today, we're going to be looking at scary music. What makes it scary? Is it all the stuff happening on the screen with the drama and the special effects? Or is music a bigger player in it than we may think, sort of like a ghost in the machine? So often with any kind of movie, music plays a crucial role. Beautiful melodies or a well-placed chord or even a single note often have a dramatic effect on the audience in ways that they don't fully understand. Then, long after the movie is over, hearing that music again, or even music similar to it, will evoke the emotions of the film, sort of like how music reminds us of old relationships. Our emotions and our music are very closely connected. One of the strongest ways that music can enhance a film is by creating an atmosphere or an ambiance. And basically, it's setting the stage for action to happen on the screen. And in this way, music actually becomes another character in the movie. Take this scene from the famous Lion King. It comes from the beginning where all the animals are waking up to a new day. Although, as the music will show us, we're not quite sure what kind of day we are waking up to. So as you see, the different kinds of music really change the mood of the movie. It really sets up what's going to happen, whether or not the audience has realized it from the start. Now, many composers will use space to create these musical landscapes or soundscapes in order to convey an idea, much like an artist will use a horizon to paint a landscape to set their action on, so a composer will use music to make this soundscape. Space in music looks literally like space. There are large intervals between these notes. While this is not major or minor, it is almost like the audience has a chance to fill in their own adventure. They see that space, the audience hears that space, and they subconsciously insert their own emotion. They fill up those gaps with what they think might be coming. So some people might see that space and hear these notes and think, ooh, this is creepy, or some people might think, ooh, this could be hopeful. You never know. But in the reality, these are just C's. No harmony, just unison notes in various octaves on the piano. By adding extra notes within this space, new emotions are created or maybe confirmed, and it can be used to effectively portray just about anything. Take this example. We fill up that space with something towards the top of that sonic palette, and we see notes very close together, just half steps, a minor second. Here, we're taking those same notes and moving them down 2 octaves, and instead of playing them at the same time, we alternate between them. Both create a very creepy, unsettling sort of atmosphere. We're not sure what's going to happen next. We could, of course, go a completely different route and use that space to fill it with something major or more hopeful. In addition to these notes, composers will Composers will often utilize specific sounds of various instruments to their fullest effect in order to craft music. And by using an instrument's timbre or specific sound tone quality of that instrument, a composer can give music even more character. So when it comes to film music, and especially scary music, usually composers are trying to use instruments in new and innovative ways to create sounds that are inhuman or not normally associated with the instrument that they're actually played on. But there's more. Composers can use rhythms and articulations to create stress. For example, one can have quick notes played at a fast tempo, and by hearing that, it will physically increase the heartbeat and the pulse of the listener, sort of instilling them with this fight or flight adrenaline mode that they don't know that's going on, but it happens. The composer can also play on the listener's sense of expectation by having an asymmetrical rhythm or a rhythm without a pattern, and this also creates tension. With so many options available to composers, it actually might seem a bit pedestrian that really the most effective way to evoke a feeling from an audience is the old fashioned way, with just the music itself, just the notes. The first basic step is to create music that mirrors what's going on the screen. And for horror films, usually it starts pretty happy and upbeat, but then things go south. So minor keys are predominantly used, not the major. Composers will then further experiment with consonance and dissonance to create tension within scenes or maybe continually increase stress from scene to scene. And we have to remember that consonance is music that's pleasing to the ear, notes that sound good, good harmonies, intervals that create a harmonious sound. Basically, this is 95% of what everyone listens to on a normal basis. Dissonance is, of course, the opposite, music or sounds that are not pleasing, intervals that create tension, that cause stress. Of all these different intervals in music, and there are a lot, at least 12 of them, if not more, the most famous tension-causing interval, and also the most accessible and the easiest to understand, is the minor second, just a half step. A minor second functions in two different ways. Predominantly, and what we have to recognize first, is the minor second is the last interval in a major scale. If you remember your solfege, it's T to Do. Without that extra half step at the end, we don't know that the scale has ended, and it sort of relieves that tension. Although if we don't relieve that tension, if we just end on T, that does create a certain amount of tension for many, many people. But outside of this use of a major scale, the minor second is actually a very unsettling interval because the frequencies of those two pitches are so close that they clash. The sine waves are very similar, but they'll never line up, especially when they are played simultaneously. Remember this example from the start? Those top notes clash because they're very, very close, but they don't quite match up. So despite the minor second being the smallest distance between two notes, it actually gives some of the biggest reactions in music. Probably the most famous in our current culture, floated into our awareness in 1975. Jaws. Jaws was released in theaters in late June of 1975, and it tells the story of a killer great white shark that terrorizes a small New England beach town at the 4th of July. The shark itself is actually not seen for much of the movie, and this makes sense because sharks live underwater and humans can't. Instead of seeing it, the shark's presence is implied by an ominous two-note musical motif, or a short recurring melody that happens every time the shark is meant to be represented. This turns out to be a genius cinematic decision because it allows the audience to imagine the shark and they sort of create their own terror while giving that terror a soundtrack. The audience doesn't see anything, they only expect something, and they have to wait for it and wait for it, and they don't know when it's coming. All the while, they hear these two notes going over and over and over again. So it is literally a soundtrack of their own terror. This was incredibly effective. In the summer of 1975, it was released right before the 4th of July. The movie takes place at the 4th of July, and that summer, there was a huge decline in attendance at America's beaches, much to the chagrin of everybody on the coasts. All the business owners were very upset with Steven Spielberg and John Williams for their movie being released at this time. And of course, to this day, everyone knows these two notes, sort of the impending doom, something scary, something bad is about to happen. Even the people that have never seen Jaws know what it is and where it comes from. But Jaws is not the only movie with creepy music that everyone recognizes. Just a few years later, in 1978, a new horror character was brought to our attention, and that was the character of Jason in the movie Halloween. So in 1978, John Carpenter directs and writes the music for a movie that goes on to create a whole bunch of movies in the franchise, and this all starts with a very creepy piano-based theme. The melody doesn't move in minor seconds like it does in Jaws. It moves primarily in the interval of a fifth, like the open strings of a violin. Now, these open fifths leave the listener unsure of what the true quality of the chord is. We don't know if it's major or if it's minor. Normally, we need the third of the chord to decipher that. But with this, we hear the two notes of the fifth, and when you finally hear a new note, it's only a half step higher. Oh, there's the minor second. It's only a half step higher than the top note of that fifth. So if you're comparing it, that's now a minor sixth. So it does imply a minor chord. What makes the whole thing creepy is the harmonic progression, or in other words, the chord progression. This is what creates the most tension in this little melody. This creepiness comes from the chords and the way that they relate to each other. It's not normal. It's not what Mozart would have written. It's not what Beethoven would have written. Even the more forward-thinking composers like Liszt or Chopin would not have been writing something like this. Basically what's happening is the tonic chord, the first chord, is moving to a 4. Now that is normal. However, this note, the 4 chord, that note that we're building the chord on is not in the key signature. It's a half step lower, and it's minor. Normally it would be major. So we have two things disrupting that normal pattern. It's moving down by a half step in the melody. It's also moving down by a half step in the bass line. And here you can see it in those first two measures. The F sharp minor chord has F sharp in the bass in the bottom note. As it moves to the weird flat minor 4, it moves down by a half step. So it's sort of this creepy thing that's going down. The melody's doing the same, and it just creates this weird, uneasy, queasy sort of feeling. As it continues on, the harmony continues to spiral down by half steps as it goes from one set of 4 bars to another, just this constant spiral of descending doom. With these two movies from the 1970s, we see that melody and harmony work together very well to create a very powerful feeling. Of course, composers have been doing this for years. It wasn't something that was suddenly invented in 1975. Because just like both the Jaws and Halloween composers, John Williams and John Carpenter, they were taking ideas from one of the early masters of film scoring, a guy by the name of Bernard Herrmann. Herrmann wrote music for radio programs as well as TV and movies, and that should tell you something, that he's writing for radio. He's able to write things without a visual stimulus, and he had a great ability to create eerie soundscapes and use music effectively, basically like that extra character, in addition to whatever story his music was accompanying. In 1960, he put all of his genius together to set the standard for all future horror films with his work in the movie called Psycho, an Alfred Hitchcock thriller with one of the most famous scenes in all of Hollywood history. But the score itself helps to make it so dramatic when that scene eventually does happen. The score has pulsating rhythms, long soaring melodies, and it just gives this feeling of constantly moving forward, but the audience is never sure where it is we are going. What are we barreling towards? Herman uses many instruments in the upper part of their range, giving a strained, if not like a strangled, timbre. Imagine the sound of a really, really high-pitched violin or a really high-pitched viola or cello. It's a much different sound than one playing in its normal range. In addition, we have many minor seconds, all of those half steps that were used in Jaws, that we hear a little bit in Jason's theme from Halloween, permeate all of the music by Bernard Herrmann in Psycho. We have trills with just a half step. We have long passages, doo-ah, ooh-ah, ooh-ah, ah, going on in the music, which is creepy and creepy and creepier because it never, ever ends. Topping the whole thing off, the icing on the cake, Herrmann uses harmony that also moves in minor seconds, just like we saw John Carpenter do later, but he's also using tritones. This is the devil's interval. It's called this because way back in the Renaissance and the Baroque and even into the classical time period, this interval, a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth, maybe going from a C up to an F sharp or a G flat, is something that composers would never do, and monks would never sing it in the church. And it creates a very uneasy feeling. Everything is very uneasy with these notes. It's not a stable chord. It feels like it needs to move somewhere and resolve to a new chord, but it's not very clear where it needs to resolve. We need to go somewhere, but we can't stay here. It's not used in classical music, but Herrmann uses it in Psycho to give that perpetual feeling of where are we going? What are we doing? The quintessential horror sound was developed in this movie, and it comes from the most famous scene, known simply as the shower or the shower scene. Herrmann uses two completely different aspects of music to create a terrifying scene. The first is his use of silence, just the normal sound of running water in a shower, followed by loud, high-pitched, squealy dissonance in the upper strings that conveys horrifying terror. It was so terrifying that in the theaters, when it was being premiered all across America, not only was the character in the movie screaming, but people in the audience were screaming. It was one of the first times that the main character was ever assaulted and killed. Oh, spoiler alert. Sorry about that. But the music added to it. In fact, when Hitchcock saw the scene, he didn't want any music playing whatsoever. But Bernard Herrmann said, no, I have an idea. And he added his music to it. After Alfred Hitchcock saw the scene with the music, he increased Herrmann's pay. So all of these movies, they help to define what we think of as scary. You might remember going trick-or-treating to people's houses, and in the background you heard creepy music and moaning voices and high-pitched squeals. That's a lot in part due to Psycho, due to Jaws, and all of the other musics that have come along based on these ideas. The use of half steps, non-traditional harmonies, offbeat rhythms, and strident timbres evoke senses of danger, unease, and downright creepiness in the listener. And many times the audience doesn't realize that they are being played like this. They're so wrapped up in the drama and the action on the screen, they don't realize that without the music, it may not be quite as stressful. But just like John Williams and John Carpenter looked back to Bernard Herrmann, we can look back to others before the invention of movies, because movies really are a recent invention. But the concept of scary movie or scary music accompanying things other than movies is a very old idea. The idea of creating motion pictures and using film to capture actors was inspired by fantastic performances from the stage, from plays and operas. And since the dawn of acting, playwrights have commissioned composers to enhance their art, enhance their drama with music to further develop the drama and to affect their audience. So over time, the music becomes more complex, and eventually the technology catches up with this sophistication of music and drama. And the two now have become this powerful duo that we know of as movies. Before this, the greatest sense of drama was opera. The most complex stage acting with the most complex music and the most intense music and the most intense plot sort of reached its peak in the 1920s. It reached its max level with an opera called Vasek by an Austrian composer named Alban Berg. Vasek was first premiered in 1925 after he had been writing it for a few years. And the music and the opera actually would fit in very well with just a normal scary movie that we would have today, except it was written 2 years before the first movie with sound. So Berg really is breaking new ground here. He is among the first to effectively use a new concept. What Berg does is he takes conventional harmony and he completely throws it out the window. He's intentionally writing music that no longer uses a key signature, but more importantly, he's intentionally making his music atonal, completely without a tonal center. So this lack of a home key makes it very disturbing, and it helps to represent the character's disturbed, deranged state of mind, as well as the disturbing psyche of, frankly, all the characters in this weird story of a jealous man who kills his lover and then throws her in a pond. And then when she is found, even her son goes to see what they have found in the pond. Very, very disturbing. And the atonal music completely fits in with this. It's a portrayal of life being without morals and music that describes it without a key. Imagine if all music sounded like Twinkle Twinkle in 3 different keys at once. But before Alban Berg, there was plenty of disturbing music that led up to his concept of completely abandoning tonality. There were many composers with groundbreaking ideas and innovations on harmony. We had Stravinsky with his Rite of Spring, whose harmonies and dissonances literally caused a riot in the ballet theater when it was premiered in 1913. We have Franz Liszt reinventing harmony by using fourths instead of thirds to make his chords, and by using old Gregorian chants in his Mephisto waltz. We have Beethoven breaking new ground with one of his final string quartets. He wrote something called the Grosse Fuge, or the Large Fugue. And it was so forward thinking, it was so dissonant for the time, that Beethoven's publishers actually refused to publish it as a part of the quartet. They thought it wouldn't sell. So they asked Beethoven to rewrite something completely different for the end of his quartet. And Beethoven had to release the Grosse Fugue separately as its own thing. We now look at it like genius, but at the time, generally hated by everybody, too dissonant. But other than harmony, we have other composers doing other things with music being creepy. They're just telling a story, making program music, story with a program or a story. We have Sergei Rachmaninoff with his Isle of the Dead, Camille Saint-Saëns writing his Danse Macabre with a violin out of tune on purpose. And of course, the great storyteller Hector Berlioz with his Symphonie Fantastique, a 5-movement symphony with amazing leitmotifs, or these recurring melodies for each character in the story. But it's a symphony, so there's nothing to see. And this is where we get the truly creepy aspect of music, because a lot of the creepy music that we know has its roots from a time when the audience didn't have anything to see. They were left in a dark, dimly lit by candles concert hall, hearing this music happening for the first time, never having heard anything else or seeing any sort of movies or having any sort of idea of what was about to happen before these strange people in long black cloaks come out and play this music at them. in the candlelight. It's a creepy scenario, but we'll talk more about that later. In the meantime, happy reading, happy listening, and don't let the bed bugs right now playing on the radio, or maybe on a streaming platform, or movies I don't know. I don't know what's around the corner, but one thing I can say: